Welcome back. Have you ever wondered what a spiritual awakening is really all about? Because in today's video I wanted to go over a question that, again, I think enough people around the globe have this question in their heads at times. They might say, well, how do you define an awakening? How do you actually define that? Well, I wanted to take some time to explain and share my perspective on the matter, and then perhaps it can be of some use for anyone out there, like always. That's how we go about these things. So in this case, hold on a second though. This is kind of messy, right? Doing these podcasts. Maybe in the near future I'll be doing some visuals again. But now I realized, I don't have the right document in front of me. It's like, okay, what are you going to talk about? Well, I could talk about this from the top of my head, which I will for the most part. But there are some points here that I felt like I should definitely make sure to share through this video. Where is it, man? I'm almost there, don't worry. Alright, where is it? Okay, I found it finally. Yeah, here's the thing, just something off topic here. I have documents on my PC, right? And they extend in the hundreds of pages, if not thousands, of video ideas and subjects and points and meditation insights I jot down, like quotes, verses I created myself. So sometimes I have to just go through all of that. Usually I have it all prepared beforehand, but now we didn't. So now let's get back on track. So the question for today is about, how do you define awakening? Now first, let me share my own points on this real quick, and then we're going to go over the question itself. So in the Bible, I think if I remember correctly, there's a quote that's called, "The first shall be the last, and the last shall be the first." And this is a very important part concerning spiritual awakening, because the first being the physical self, the ego, that shall be the last. And what was originally lost in our living was the spiritual side of our existence, which now has to become first. So it is about having a strong conscious awareness when dealing with life altogether, from a spiritual perspective, to know the spiritual realm is the most important in order to influence and improve the physical realm. Now it's also like Bob Proctor would say, I'm not just a human being having a spiritual experience, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. Now this all is what is revealing what spiritual awakening is all about. It is basically becoming aware that there is more to your life than just the physical. And then as you take that journey, as you go deeper and deeper into the spiritual nature of yourself, you will discover more and more peculiar but interesting things about yourself and this reality in which we currently exist, physically speaking, and what may lay beyond this physicality. Some people will not believe it, but yet the spiritual awakening is about you actually experiencing literally for yourself that there's more to the physical side than you normally knew. There's like more things to this whole experience of life than we normally know about if we only go about with our physical senses. So now let's go to the question. How do you define an awakening? We can all rightfully surmise that awakening are anecdotal and subjective, so everyone can have different insights and definitions. It's very true. I myself have never labeled myself awakened, as I don't consider myself awakened, much less understand what it encompasses holistically. I myself have had unexplained or paranormal events happen to me, just as other people have had their fair share of stories. I've undergone brief moments of what one would call heightened awareness, where I wake up from bed and reality just seems different, almost euphoric, but at the same time foreign. But these are fleeting moments which have never lasted over a day. I have vast amounts of explicit knowledge on many spiritual topics and some implicit experiences. The way I understand awakening, it's something that comes to you out of the blue. You wake up one day feeling different and it's permanent. So a couple questions on this subject. Is all awakening considered spiritual, as in spiritual awakening? Is there more than one awakening? Are awakening a permanent thing? Is there more than one type of awakening? Do you still have bad days on awakening? And these are pretty interesting questions, because he made a good point there. based from his own experience. First of all, it is true, spiritual awakening, these things we experience are subjective, they're personal to us, they happen in us, in our consciousness, in a realm that we normally do not perceive and cannot really pinpoint as well. So other people might not see the same thing as you are when you're having this awakening. That's very true, but that doesn't mean it's untrue there for what you have experienced. And he also talks about this euphoric feeling lasting for perhaps a day or less, but not beyond it. This I can sort of confirm from experience, but it kind of depends though. If I look back on my life, there have been moments like that where I would have this strong state of bliss and euphoric. When I knew it was because I became completely lucid and aware of things that I wasn't aware of before, and then they faded. Now there's a good reason why they fade though, is what I would say, is that because of our habitual way of living, focusing on physicality alone. So spiritual awakening is about actually turning that around, of being habitually aware and focused on the spiritual side of your own existence while going through the physical journeys for now. So if we go over his question, is all awakening considered spiritual, as in spiritual awakening? It actually depends on what a person's idea of awakening is. I mean, it's kind of the same as enlightenment. Some people throw that word around, but they don't really know what it even means. They make assumptions like, well, if you're enlightened, you would do this or that, or you wouldn't do this or that. But it's like, but who says that that is the truth though? You see, a spiritual awakening would lead to a sort of unified truth that we all will agree upon. And there, even though the words and experiences might be totally different from one another, there's this main theme that is still intact in the act of awakening. So a person that is delusional, for example, and then would say, I am awakened, well, we know, based on what they would say, that there is not a true awakening. But if they are revealing something that throughout thousands of years, and that generally speaking are accepted as what happens when you awaken, if they then start to say things that are in alignment with that, then we know, yes, that's part of an awakening. So all awakening, that really depends on what a person's actual level of awareness is, of understanding is on this subject to begin with. Now, is there more than one awakening? That's a really interesting question, because to me, if I really think about this carefully, then I would say yes and no. Like, if you could say that there's a way of awakening in the dream world, in the astral world, as they would say. So when your body's asleep, there is a real ability and possibility for people to become aware and awake while they're in their dream world. Now, I can say this because I have had this happen to me numerous times throughout my life so far. So it is not an idea. So there you could say technically, well, yeah, there's like more than one awakening. You have it physically while you're in your body, and you can have it spiritually as well when you're not in your physical body, because usually we are not awake and aware in those realms either. So it is interesting. I mean, but this is already on a very deep level. So I think the first thing people really want to focus on is just simply becoming awake and aware while they're still in their body right here and now, because it's just the easiest. Here we have conscious awareness intact. When we sleep, we generally let the conscious awareness go into inactivity. Well, that's not entirely accurate, but we're just simply not aware, yet we are observing and experiencing things, which is the weird part. Now, are awakening a permanent thing? I've been awake again in the lucid dream world, in the astral world, whatever you want to call it, and it was not instantly a permanent thing. It's the same for physically. These things, when you become aware of a greater reality, it does become permanent in the sense that you will never forget it. But it can go back dormant again if we are then habitually living again in total contradiction to what we have discovered through this awakening. So spiritually speaking, I can have the most profound experience, but then if I go back to my old ways of living, it's like the awakening never happened. That's kind of the deal. But yet it does have an effect on the soul, I would say. It does have a very profound effect deep within our being. I mean, true awakenings, they have specifically that effect. A true spiritual experience and awakening, even though it's not really a spiritual experience, because as Bob Proctor would say, we are spiritual beings, so it's totally normal. It's not something abnormal as we normally assume. But you have these experiences, and then it becomes like a matter of it being so profound that you can never forget it, so it remains permanently with you, and it starts permanently influencing your way of living. That's another sign of true spiritual awakening, because then you have another part that throughout history people can agree on. If you study their works and people that are having these experiences themselves, there's some profound things that happen that you will never forget, so therefore they become permanent, at least in your awareness. It doesn't necessarily mean that you will instantly be permanently able to live from that awareness without issues because of your old habitual way of living. So I would say the permanency comes in on a soul level. So there, part of you has become aware of something greater. But then the human part of you right now, that is experiencing this world, has to sort of catch up with that. That's kind of the situation. Is there more than one type of awakening? Well, it's the same question as we answered earlier. I would say yes, sort of. Like, ultimately, the true awakening is just being awake and aware, both when you are physically active here and when you're non-physically active in the dream world, in the astral world. That is the full-blown awakening. If you can do that, you're technically, literally awake. You're no longer asleep at all, ever. Meaning going unconscious, forgetting things, etc. Now the last question, do you still have bad days on awakening? And there we would say yes. But the bad days don't really feel the same way as they were before you became more and more spiritually awake and aware. That's the thing. Before that, you took life only from the perspective of it being a physical journey, you being a physical being here, suffering, going through all this stuff that might happen on Earth, etc. And then you would feel terrible about it. But then, due to spiritual awakening, you become more and more aware of the eternal side of your own nature, of life, of the universe, of God, whatever you want to call it. And you start to see the unity that we all actually share from a spiritual perspective. So even though days may be bad, for me, for others, bad things can still happen, at times randomly, we no longer really let it drag us down as much as before the awakening occurred. So you would learn to look at good and bad things more from a more non-attached perspective. I guess that's how we would put that. So you don't really put a lot of stress on it anymore in the same way, where it's like, oh, I'm having such a bad day, I feel so terrible, this and that. Instead, you're like, I have a bad day, I'm aware that I'm having a bad day, the things aren't going as positive as I would like them to be, but hey, isn't it amazing to know that we're all spiritual beings on this eternal journey? Just like that. Your bad day suddenly isn't as bad as it used to be anymore, because you're able to perceive beyond it more so than before the awakening occurred. So again, I don't think it's proper or accurate to say that you would have 0 bad days when you awaken, because this realm, physically speaking, is just a realm full of conflicts all the time, and even awakened people will have to deal with that. They might be better skilled in dealing with it. They might be able to actually leave this realm at times at will by not going to sleep, but letting the body fall asleep while their conscience goes off into another dimension of life, and they're just hanging out there, so to speak. I mean, they can be skilled like that, but they still will have to face and deal with all the typical issues that happen between human beings when they're not spiritually awake to begin with, because that is where most of our conflicts arise from this innate ignorance about this situation. So this is how I would define a spiritual awakening. It's just simply a person that has become more and more aware from actual inner perception and experience that there is more to them than just the physical, and there's no longer a theory just because they heard others talk about this. They heard someone say, oh yeah, you're spiritual being, and it's like, oh, whoa, yeah, I am, and you don't have the experience at all from from in your personal life. And then it's pretty meaningless still, and then it's hearsay. But once you have had the experiences for yourself, these peculiar spiritual things where you know these are not physically occurring to me, but yet they occurred, well, that to me is part of awakening. And then as you keep going deeper on this journey, discovering more and more elements to that invisible side of you, well, you become more and more awake and aware concerning spiritual things. So that is how I would describe it. I try not to overcomplicate it, and hopefully the video made some sense. So if you've been experiencing some peculiar things yourself that you know are spiritual, but others, they might doubt your claims or think it's strange or crazy, don't worry about it, because again, spiritual awareness is very rare in this world. Let's be honest here, the majority of people are simply not spiritually aware at all about anything. So therefore you will not necessarily find support with most people when you start sharing your own experiences like that randomly. But there are people out there like me who have also had our own peculiar experiences, and we know there's more to life than just the physical, from literal perception, from literal experience. Like, I cannot deny my own experiences. I can pretend I never had them just to try and not make you upset about them, but I still had them, so I can't deny it. And it's the same for you if you've had them. And that's the beauty, ultimately, is to not run away from it, not feel bad about it, not feel ashamed about it, but actually start exploring it more and more deeply, either with the right people or at least through the right studies. But by making sure that you actually study and follow the right advice from other people throughout history who have reached this spiritual awakening for themselves. Now that's all I wanted to share with you today. Now, if you're new to this channel, consider subscribing to receive inspirational videos on a regular basis. And with that being said, dear viewer, never forget that we are the dreamers.